Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got a video about the builder's model for the Iowa Class Battleships. And specifically, we're going to look at some of the things that show up on the builder's model that are not actually in the finished ship, or things that are altered while the ship is under construction or in use. I am not aware of this builder's model being saved anywhere. There's a strong chance that it was saved and it's now out on display somewhere, but I've never been able to run into it. And there are precious few photographs of this model, all black and white. So the two sources that I found so far where you can find pictures of this model is if you've got Norman Friedman's U.S. Naval Battleships Illustrated History. On page 313 of this new edition that Naval Institute Press put out, you can see these pictures here, which we'll be talking about. Or, if you get the now out of print Iowa Class Battleships by Robert Summerall, on page 25, he has a different picture of it in it, more of a top view. So these three pictures of this builder's model are, as far as I know, the only evidence of the ship as originally designed. Looking at the blueprints of the ship, they don't seem to depict the ship in this configuration. Presumably the original blueprints would have, the ones produced by the New York Navy Yard as Iowa is starting construction or just before she starts construction. However, oftentimes those blueprints would be modified as they're changing things, and you do those modifications right on the blueprint. So they may well have erased where some of these features are that are missing and drawn in something completely different. So these pictures of models which Summerall and Friedman were able to get might be the only evidence of this that's left. Many of the major features of this ship are accurate. This model depicts the ship as she was approved around June of 1938. So this is roughly a year and a half, 2 years before any of the Iowas start construction. And it really shows the continuity of the design from the South Dakota class and even going back to older classes of battleship. She has a lot of archaic style features here, which will be removed while the ship is under construction, which kind of distances the Iowa class, the ultimate completed class of American battleships, from all of those earlier classes of ships, which were extremely iterative in getting to that point. So, some things early on. We'll start at the bow and we'll just work our way towards the stern. It's very interesting. The bow here does not show any sort of plated in feature. It's got neither what New Jersey has, where it's just plated in right around the curve of the existing bow as a way of keeping water down, nor does it have what the Iowas had during World War II, which is that pulpit type structure on the bow, which Iowa and Wisconsin still have. And that makes sense, because one of the big things about this model is just how light the anti-aircraft battery depicted is. So that pulpit with that anti-aircraft battery isn't added until the back half of 1943, when Iowa and New Jersey are already in commission. Interestingly, the model doesn't depict any light anti-aircraft guns. At this time in 1938, the 50 caliber machine gun is the light anti-aircraft gun, and normally a battleship would have 8 mounts for those guns. Potentially a ship this large would have more like 12 mounts, but you don't see any of them depicted, so we don't know exactly where those locations would be. I know I just said we're going to start at the bow and work our way to the stern, but while we're talking about anti-aircraft guns, it does show 4 quadruple 1.1-inch machine guns, the so-called Chicago Piano, and those were the medium-range anti-aircraft guns of the 1930s and early 1940s, and it's not until late 42, early 43 that they start getting swapped out with the more powerful Bofors. So this is showing those mounts in some of the mounts that actually do end up on the ship just as 40mm guns. That is the ones up on the 05 level at the bridge, and the one back at the aft end of the superstructure up on the 03 level. So those are the only 4 gun mounts originally installed. And again, that's in line with what other battleships have. What the North Carolina class were originally designed to have, what older battleships like the standard type at Pearl Harbor had during the attack. So those mounts are what you would expect to see in 1938. It goes to show you just how little the threat of aircraft is understood at this time, and how much they're going to expand that over the war as the threat becomes realized. And also they decide that, hey, this is a great platform with a massive reserve of buoyancy where we can just keep adding this sort of stuff. Interestingly, as we work our way back down the bow, this might just be because of the lack of detail. But early on in the design, there should be an indent there on the port side, just a little bit after the bow, and that recess is for a third anchor to sit in. While these ships are under construction, that recess is deleted from the plans, and the third anchor is deleted entirely. Makes the deck flush so they don't have to make any complicated cutouts and things. But none of the anchors, anchor chains, anchor handling equipment are depicted, so I guess it's not surprising that that's not there. Interestingly, as we move our way back along the hull, just forward to turret 1, you can see that there's like a pipe section depicted. That is the forward boat boom. So those fold up alongside the ship, and when you're in harbor, you would fold those out and then tie all your boats off to them, and they would be in the water as opposed to tied up to the ship. There is also an aft boat boom. You can just barely make it out at the stern of this model. And those are very close to where the accommodation brow is, the hinged stairway / ladder. Boat would come up alongside the accommodation brow, everybody would come up on board the ship, and then the boat would either go back to whatever boat it came from or tie off at that post. So it's interesting that they're not showing things like anchors, but they are showing those sorts of boat booms. It does have the breakwater, which is really the only thing standing proud on the main deck, with the exception of the aircraft equipment at the stern. The forward turrets look perfectly normal. There's some interesting rigging coming off of the forward superstructure going down to the top of turret 2. Probably some sort of radio antenna, and interestingly, that never makes it into the completed design. Working our way back, the superstructure, you can tell, is that pre-war / early war open bridge style without any of the enclosures. This is what Iowa is actually completed with. New Jersey's is plated in, and Missouri and Wisconsin's are plated in a little bit larger, which then go back and replate Iowa and New Jersey a little bit later on. Oh, that's really interesting. So you can see that there's a Mark 37 director depicted above the conning tower there. That is actually in place. No radar antennas are depicted at this time in 1938, so that will eventually get a like bed spring style antenna on top so that it has radar in addition to the optics. You can see a rangefinder on top of the conning tower. That is not added to the final design. There's a kind of rangefinder device inside that 05 level of the conning tower that just has periscopes coming through the roof. It doesn't have a full-on like rangefinder apparatus on top of the roof of the conning tower. That's not the only rangefinder depicted, though. The forward superstructure on about the 06 or 07 level, there is a platform with a navigating rangefinder on it. That's pretty common on American battleships during the interwar period. They're often mounted on the turret tops. So it's interesting that this one's mounted in the superstructure. Those are never installed on the Iowa Class battleships. And if you look at the picture of the stern of the ship, you can see that there's a second one of those navigating rangefinders mounted on top of turret number 3. Oh, and you can see there's antennas that run down to turret number 3 also. Again, those aren't added either. Again, the Mark 38 director on top of the forward superstructure doesn't have its radar antenna. The mast is a very, very simple pole mast without any sort of radar associated. Again, 1938, this isn't surprising at all. Something that is interesting up there at the top of the superstructure, the yards, the posts associated with the mast that come out of the superstructure, That's where the signal flag halyards are run to. They are mounted on the forward end of the superstructure. Actually, as built, those will be mounted at the aft end of the superstructure where the mast is, not that forward end. The funnels have really weird caps on them that curve from front to back. I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to depict. Funnel caps during this time period pretty commonly just feature a curve facing backwards so that the smoke is being directed back, not straight up, because straight above that is the rangefinder, which at this time doesn't have any radar. It's purely optical, so smoke from the funnel would foul that if the ship isn't moving fast enough to clear it. So it's interesting that these funnels are that weird shape. The funnel caps, as actually installed, are going to be raked aft a lot more to help direct the smoke that way. The 5-inch guns, interestingly, are in the same position that they've always been designed to be in. What's really, really interesting about this model is all of the ship's boats amidships. You can see that they're on structures stacked up the side of the superstructure between the 5-inch mounts and, of course, between the funnels. That is extremely common on interwar battleships. Look at a picture of Arizona, and she's got all of these boats aft of her funnel before the after superstructure. Just a massive park of these boats nested together, stacked 2 and 3 high amidships there, with some big boat cranes also nearby to help lower them into the water. So that is really interesting. It's one of the main features here that ties New Jersey into the older style of battleships. Of course, that is a suboptimal position. Those areas in the superstructure would be ideal for anti-aircraft guns, and that is what ends up getting put there in place of boats. Plus, those boats in the middle of the superstructure, they're wood, they have gasoline engines, any sort of projectile damage at all, and those are going to burn very badly. One of the reasons why you'd put them in the superstructure there in the middle is because they're relatively protected from the blast effect of the 16-inch guns. Again, these are wooden boats during this time period, so if they're too close to the turrets, the blast effect of the guns could literally blow them to splinters or could blow them off the side of the ship. So that's why you'd put that sort of stuff amidships. But it also makes sense. In wartime, you're not going to carry those boats. So these ships are completed with anti-aircraft guns in those positions. You've got, holy cow, you've got 14 20mm guns and 24 40mm barrels in that area where these boats and cranes are removed from. So that's a massive proportion of the ship's anti-aircraft firepower. About 20% of it gets put there in place of the boats. The boats will eventually find their way on the fantail back where the aviation facilities are. Interestingly, many European battleships are also putting their aviation facilities amidships. Again, same reason, it helps keep them away from the blast effects of the guns. Same issue, these canvas and wood and aluminum airplanes with all this high-octane aviation gasoline burn very badly. You don't want that in the middle of your superstructure and secondary gun battery. So the U.S. Navy starts pushing that back to the stern. The Iowa class has a very wide stern and a very long stern. So that means that there is enough space, far enough away from the aft turrets, to put the aviation facilities and eventually the boat facilities back there, which is much preferable. If you get hit and this stuff starts to burn, it's much preferable to have this at the stern of the ship where there isn't a whole lot else going on, as opposed to right in the middle of your battleship. So that's a really smart wartime change. That said, boat handling operations here are much simpler, so they do have to do the more difficult thing. As we're moving our way aft, you can see that there are some boats even on the after part of the superstructure. Again, those get moved as well. You can see the aft mast. It's also very light and pole-like. Not too dissimilar from what's actually built, though. This depicts a mast going all the way down to the deck, coming up the back end of the funnel. As actually built, it basically just comes out of the top back end of the funnel. It doesn't extend all the way down. But as built, it is an incredibly light pole mast which doesn't have room for electronics. So before the end of the war, all 4 completed Iowa Class battleships have that modified to more of like a tripod structure that then has room for more stuff. And they'll all end up getting one of 2 types of quadrupodal structure in the 1950s to add even more electronics back there. Well, that's interesting. At the aft end of the superstructure, where the aft tower for the rangefinder, the second Mark 38 Director, has a searchlight on it. That searchlight will not be installed there because directors for the 40mm gun tubs will be in that position. That searchlight will be placed up forward between the conning tower and the forward Mark 37 5-inch Director, and then it'll be removed pretty quickly on. You can see that there's 2 other searchlights on the funnels. Those will be there. They're just about 2 or 3 stories higher up the funnels. Again, those lower positions get directors mounted on them for the 40mm guns. And you can see that there are 2 searchlights on each side of the Midships Mark 37 Directors, Sky 2 and Sky 3, the ones adjacent to the funnels. Only one of those 2 searchlights will be installed, and the other position will be a 20mm gun position on Iowa and New Jersey. So it's interesting to see this is depicting 7 searchlights. The Iowas will actually be completed with 5 of these big 36-inch searchlights. Searchlights are cool. They're actually aimed by the Mark I fire computers for the 5-inch guns, so that and they're remote powered, so you don't need somebody up there turning on the searchlight, because as soon as you turn on the searchlight, everybody else in this night fight's going to start shooting machine guns at it. So the U.S. Navy realizes that they're completely unmanned, controlled by the computer down below, pointed at the target, and then the guns can shoot at whatever it's illuminating. But it's interesting to see no radar depicted on this model. As the ship starts to get radar, fewer and fewer of these searchlights are installed, and all those 36-inch searchlights will be removed pretty early post-war. And yeah, everything depicted through the fantail of the ship looks pretty similar. The one other major thing I forgot to mention is basically the entire distance from turret 1 to turret 3, the hull has a weird cutout in it. This is another thing that shows the design evolution from the South Dakota into the Iowa class, that these are just stretched South Dakotas. If you look at this picture of Massachusetts that we took when we were up there most recently, you can see that at the top of her armored belt, there is an indent, and then the main deck kind of overhangs that a little bit. And in that indent, there are all sorts of accesses to get into the void spaces beneath the various fuel tanks and void spaces of the torpedo blisters. On the Iowa class, instead of having that complicated cut in and whatnot that the South Dakotas have, they just plated the whole hull flush, and that means that you can access those tanks from inside the ship, which makes it much simpler to go in for maintenance. Not that they would have been going in all that frequently. It doesn't seem like those tanks got opened very often. But just a really smart way to simplify the design of the ship. It's one of those things that they learned while they were building the South Dakotas, and somebody was like, hey, wouldn't it just be easy if we made this flat and had a door on the inside to get there instead of having to be on the outside? But really great that it's depicted in this model, and that the modeler was able to capture that. So, what is something that you noticed on this model that I didn't point out? Let us know in the comment section down below. Is there anything that this model depicts that you think should have been done on the completed Iowa Class battleships? I think that including the boat cranes amidships wouldn't have been a bad idea. These ships operate as flagships, so they always had large numbers of ships' boats on board, and having more large cranes like that to help with moving supplies around and moving boats on and off wouldn't have been a bad thing. I think there would have been a way to place it so it didn't interfere too much with the anti-aircraft arcs of fire. But let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below for ways to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.